Today we are going to talk about political parties and partisan identification. It is the first lecture in a two-lecture series on political parties. And you might say, well, Ryan, you've referred to this section of the course as behavior and not institutions, because institution was the first part, but you also refer to parties as institutions fairly regularly, to which I say, thanks for listening to what I say. That's nice to know that you've been paying attention. And then I would say, I'm allowed to do what I want. I organize the class how I feel like it. But mainly, I think that we understand parties as institutions kind of inherently, right? They're things that exist. I kind of go over their structure a little bit in this lecture. But the thing that's much more interesting to me is how they have impacted the behavior of average citizens, as well as the behavior of elites operating within politics. So, exciting stuff all around. Basically, political parties are important. They've become indispensable in the American system, but right now they are pretty fragile. Parties can connect diverse interests and give people a platform through which they can talk about their grievances and their hopes for the future, can mobilize voters and coordinate governance. Is very effective for that. Yet, parties as they exist today have, in effect, weakened American democracy. They are failing to uphold something that they call institutional forbearance, basically saying, hey guys, let's keep the institutions and operate within them, and mutual toleration. They hate each other now. Polarization is a problem, which we talk about on Thursday. Americans don't trust the political parties. And APSA, the professional organization putting this together, is thinking, well, this could be a good thing. This could be a bad thing. It's kind of showing civic vigilance. They're keeping on top of the parties and saying, hey, they're ideally not going to do bad things to us, but we're not going to trust them. Like, healthy distrust of institutions is a good thing. You don't want to just completely say, hey, I'm going to give over all of my autonomy to the state or to these political parties. But distrust is rising. Reforms have to realign party incentives rather than expect spontaneous voter realignment. We need to change the institutions themselves before we change the people. The people will follow. We have to change the institutions to incentivize them to be good again. You are confusing two specific mechanisms: ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Ranked choice voting is the opposite of what we have here. We have something called first past the post voting. Basically, you have everybody in a race, in an election, but we're going to say it's a foot race here. They're all running to the finish line, winning the election. And whoever gets across that finish line first, being 51% of the votes, they win. Doesn't matter how close behind the people were behind them. If they get 51%, they win. Ranked choice voting is like what the Democratic primary in New York was, and what a lot of more evolved democracies in America, in the world, have. Ranked choice voting would be, say there are 5 candidates on the ballot. I really love candidate number A. I'm going to... Where are my markers? Hold on. This is going to be easier to illustrate this way. There are 5 candidate... I want these in letters, actually. There are 5 candidates on the ballot. Candidates A through E. I really like candidate B. That's my guy. If I had first past the post voting and I could only vote for one of them, I would vote for him. So I'm going to vote and rank him my first favorite candidate. Now the thing is, candidate A and B are the major 2 candidates. The race would probably be between those 2 in a first past the post election. But I really hate candidate A. I don't want candidate A to win in any way, shape, or form. And for some reason, if candidate B loses, I'm going to rank my second choice as candidate C. So candidate B doesn't meet a certain threshold of votes, my vote will actually go to candidate C. And so on and so forth down the rank. And finally, I would go to candidate A as my 5th choice. This allows third-party candidates, or unaffiliated candidates, independent candidates, ideologically diverse candidates to potentially win without spoiling the vote. Say we have these 5 candidates, and it's between A and B, and they really are going head-to-head getting most of the votes. But my favorite candidate is candidate C, even though where did I just put my red marker? God damn it. Okay, there we are. Candidate A and B are ranked first as like they're potentially going to win. That's Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But I want to vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, because I like her raps that she releases. In any normal first past the post election, if I voted for candidate C as the first one over candidate B, even though I prefer candidate B over candidate A, I would basically be spoiling a vote for candidate B, right? Because my vote that I could have given to candidate B, even though I'm ideologically closer to them, is being wasted on candidate C, who doesn't have a chance in hell to win. This adjusts that. So when candidate C inevitably doesn't make the threshold needed to win, my vote would then go to candidate B, the clear winner of that, but it wouldn't spoil it. Does this make sense? This is a little bit complicated. I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. I think it's pretty swell. So is APSA. So ranked choice voting is one of those. Proportional representation basically suggests like, hey, let's do away with the Senate. That's like a stupid, archaic idea of having each state represented by just 2 people. Let's maybe even have multi-member districts for districts that are particularly populous. Because if we're having a truly representative democracy, it should be representative of the people entire, rather than giving all those assholes out in Wyoming way more power than all of those assholes in New York. Right? We're all assholes, but we want the flavor of asshole of New York rather than Wyoming. Does that make sense too? So let's dive into political parties and partisan identification. Today we're going to talk about the structure, the function, and the behavioral dimensions of American political parties. We're going to explore what parties are, why they form, and the key roles that they play in American democracy, particularly in facilitating elections, making them happen, aggregating interest, giving people a stage upon which they can voice their opinions and talk to like-minded individuals, and structure governance. This lecture also is going to examine psychological underpinnings of partisan identification, because if you decide to go with a party, it's a kind of psychosis. You all should feel a little crazy if you are a strong partisan. Also, if you're an independent. Ooh. All of these attachments to party, what I'm arguing here, shape political behavior, electoral choice, and perceptions of governmental legitimacy. So let's dive in. What are political parties? We kind of already get this. Political parties are organized groups that aim to control government by winning elections and holding office. That's your stock standard definition. Parties are organizations that aim to control government by winning elections and holding office. Note how this is super similar to what Mayhew says about individual members of Congress. They exist to receive utility through winning elections. That's what they care about. The rest is set dressing. They play a little critical role in aggregating interests, recruiting candidates, and structuring the choices available to voters. In the American context, the two-party system has proven remarkably durable over time. Now, we haven't had the same two-party system the entire time that we have operated in America. Sure, it could be, think of the early American party system, and I'll cover this more on Thursday, where you have the two parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. But even so, if we look at the Republican and Democratic Party of the 1950s, those are a different Republican and Democratic Party than we have right now. Parties change over time, but still, we generally have a two-party system in this country. From an institutional standpoint, single-member districts and plurality voting reinforce the dominance of two major parties, while culturally, Americans have long internalized partisan competition as a core feature of democracy. Americans like to argue. We like to have an enemy and a friend, someone to root for and someone to root against. And these parties give us an avenue through which we can do that. Importantly, parties aren't governmental entities, but private associations that influence public power. This dual nature of parties, both as pseudo-governments, but not actually governments, as well as private associations, allow them to act both as mediators of citizen preference and gatekeepers of political representation. Their persistence and adaptability underscore their centrality to the operation of American democracy. Despite what Alexander Hamilton warns against in Federalist Number 10, American democracy and our system could not operate as it does now without the existence of party. Whether you want to call that a necessary evil or a feature, not a bug, they have to exist for us to work right now. Why do they form? Well, parties emerge to resolve fundamental coordination problems in democratic systems. Think of Mann-Kerr-Olson and collective action problems. We've talked about this. They help actors overcome three key challenges. First, facilitating collective action among voters and candidates, facilitating electoral competition and legislative competition, coordinating policymaking within fragmented institutions, and managing ambition among political elites. When I say coordinating policymaking and fragmented institutions, this allows a Republican government at the federal level to see their policies implemented as they want to at the state or local level. And you can also have bottom-up integration where policies that are interesting under, for instance, a Democratic government at the local level might trickle up to the national level. This is what Republicans are trying to fearmonger about Zoran Mamdani right now, that his democratic socialist agenda will then trickle up to the Democratic Party nationally, and therefore everyone will have to eat halal food or something. They manage political ambition and elite conflict by basically being the guys in a smoke-filled room who allows certain people to run for office. Once again, going to Zoran Mamdani. This is why the Democratic establishment hated him so much and still hates him so much. It took it took Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries until last week to endorse Zoran Mamdani, despite the fact that Zoran Mamdani comes from Hakeem Jeffries' district, even though he is a Democrat. Historically, the Democratic Party has always supported their candidate for whatever race. You know, vote blue no matter who is a slogan for a reason. But Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic establishment didn't like Zoran Mamdani because he didn't go up through the proper channels. Here, the party failed to manage political ambition and elite conflict. We see this in the Maine primary for Senate, where you have Graham Plattner, this outside candidate from rural Maine, come in and say, hey, I'm going to run for Senate. He becomes hugely popular and then has some scandals with some of his past because he's a person or whatever. And Chuck Schumer says, we can't run this guy. We don't control him, and he is too volatile. He hasn't been vetted. So he gets the former governor of Maine, Janet Mills, to run in that primary. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what I'm talking about. If you're from Maine, you should be aware of it. And finally, parties link citizens to governance. Historically, the U.S. party system evolved from ad hoc functions into institutionalized organizations designed to sustain governance in a complex federal system. It's hard for average people to interact with the government if they don't have some kind of vessel through which they can do that. Parties serve that function. Speaking of functions, party functions in a democracy. Well, they recruit candidates, they organize campaigns, and perform critical get-out-the-vote operations. So, recruiting candidates. You hear a lot about the bench in a party, as in the candidates that they can get to run for office. You hear a lot about the pipeline to office. Parties help kind of vet certain candidates. Who's a rising star? Who can we get to run for this office? Who can we get to put in here? So-and-so is a city council member in this very complex city. Maybe we get them to run for state legislature. For a few years in the state legislature, they're showing some promise. Let me have them run for, federal office in the House of Representatives or even the governor's race. They're a rising star there. They might come all the way up and maybe they're going to run for president someday. It's very rare that you see someone like Donald Trump just enter without a political background and say, hey, I'm going to, run for president, and then it works. They can provide policy cues through brand label. They coordinate legislative action and provide organizational cohesion in Congress and the executive branch. The Republican Party will stand for a set of ideals, whether that's specific policies or more of just a general vibe of the kinds of policies that they like. They can cue each other based on what that vibe is. The same thing for Democrats. And this leads to a more cohesive view of how the government runs. As you all are abundantly aware of, the Constitution is a very brief document. There is not a lot said about the actual day-to-day governance of institutions. Parties allow us to kind of step in and put those guardrails up and actually have a track upon which we can drive this train. So, I hinted when we were talking about the reading, which you all did, about this 1950 report from APSA. I'm just going to skip and open all of these up, where the American Political Science Association comes up with this idea: let's have responsible parties. Responsible parties. And by that, they mean let's have very strict party platforms that every party puts out, basically specific governing goals. We're going to increase the inheritance tax this much. We are going to increase defense spending this much. We are going to decrease entitlement programs this much. We're going to implement this program. We're going to do this, 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 and this. We're going to check them off the list, and that is what we are going to do for you folks in America. That allows for this view of a very unified and centralized party structure. Everybody signs on to this platform. Everybody delivers this platform, and then we, dust our hands off and go home at the end of the day. Closest that we get to this is Newt Gingrich in his contract with America, in which he basically says, we're going to do these things, the Republicans, if we get Congress back. We're not going to let Bill Clinton have his way, and that's what we're going to do, the contract with America. We promise you guys, if you vote in Republicans into Congress in the early 90s, we will deliver these goals for you. They get in, and of course, they don't end up actually doing that because Newt Gingrich was a clever politician and just wanted to get power, but they do some of those things. Around the same time, you have Ross Perot, who runs as a third-party candidate for president, and his new party, which I think is called the American Independent Party or something like that. Freedom might be in there too. I don't know. It's not important. He lost. He wins a lot of support as a third-party candidate, the most support a third-party candidate has received in a long time, because his party platform is very simple, it is very comprehensive, and he's able to do this basically because he doesn't have a party machine that already exists that he needs to contend with all of these different ideas under a big coalitional tent. It's just him and his buds that he got along because he doesn't like where the Republican Party's going. Responsible parties don't exist. This is a nice idea. It is a lofty goal for parties to go for. It is highly impractical. It has not worked. And it is a good example to me of academics needing to touch grass. So, parties are structured in kind of a pyramidal structure, which I now realize you can't read that figure. It's not important. Ignore it. American parties operate as federal networks spanning national, state, and local levels. National committees, they oversee branding and funding. It's very important. Right now, the DSEC, the Democrat Senate Election Committee, is doing a lot to raise funds for Janet Mills in Maine, because that is their chosen candidate. They are doing a lot for fundraising in the races in Virginia, because Virginia is a very interesting off-election cycle state where they are hoping that Democrats will be able to hold strong or win. Congressional committees, they will recruit and assist candidates. This could be through policy information, sharing of information, through lending their image along. There is a reason why Zohran Mamdani appeared on stage recently with both Bernie Sanders and AOC. He wants to utilize their image to raise his profile and to signal that he is of an ideological tradition with them. Beyond that, what was interesting was Kathy Hochul, the much more centrist conservative governor of New York. She is a Democrat, but she's a conservative Democrat, appeared on stage with him as well. She doesn't draw as big crowds, but still, it was something. And state and local parties largely handle registration and mobilization. You'll see at fairs and at community events, your local county Republican or Democratic Party might have a voter registration table, trying to get people to register to vote, not just for their party, but in general, but usually for their party, and then get out there and vote ideally to support their candidate. If you register to vote, here's a little bit of literature about Joe Schmo, who's running for city council under the Republican ticket, and why he's good, and why you should elect him. So, Parties also primarily function as service providers for candidates and supply campaign infrastructure to them. They offer resources, largely financial, as well as expertise. They can offer voter files, data analytics, fundraising assistance, and media guidance. And they can also coordinate voter outreach. If you're a candidate, your time is very precious. You got to go knocking doors. You got to go talk to people. You can't just be spending the whole time on the phone talking to donors saying, hey guys, I need more money. I need more money. That's not what you have to spend all your time for. You actually have to go out and earn some votes as well. The national committees allocate resources strategically, prioritizing competitive contests where marginal support can tip outcomes. This is why you see many elections in very lopsided constituencies go uncontested entirely. Arkansas is a great example of this. Their state legislature is very conservative. Democrats aren't going to win there. So often, candidates for their state legislature who run on the Republican ticket don't even have an opponent. They won't have a primary. They're just a guy who's been there and is like, hey guys, I'm going to run for office again. You guys should vote for me again. And people from Arkansas are like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'm going to check the one box that's on the ballot. Unless you want to write in someone and waste your vote. So historically, parties existed as mass membership organizations, but they have shifted then to professionalized service providers. And this reflects changes in campaign finance law, technologies, as well as the overall political culture of the United States. We are more nationalized, and so support from these national parties tends to help us decide who to vote for through heuristics and things like that. Party identification. Where does this come from? Another fun image right here. Fun fact, if you look up Republican family, this is the third image that shows up for it, which is crazy. Party identification basically means the psychological attachment that one has to major parties. This attachment develops in early socialization through your family, through your peers, through your local political context, and then stabilizes in adulthood. If you are a child growing up in poverty, that is going to shape how you view the political structures of the world. Same thing if you grow up as a very rich child, or as a child of immigrants, or a child in Nantucket. Those are going to shape how you view politics and parties. Then the ideology that you develop over time, what Fiorina talks about is like a running tally of ideas, as well as your personal experiences, will influence how you view parties over time. So say you are a woman who grows up in a conservative family, and then you have a pregnancy scare and have to deal with abortion providers in a red state. That is going to shape how you view Republicans in relationship to that legislation, or vice versa if you are in a Democratic state. And party interpretation is largely stable. The literature suggests you develop ideas about parties, how you feel about them, whether or not your identity gloms onto one of them, but it can shift over time. Case in point, everybody hates Democrats right now, including Democrats, especially Democrats. Everybody hates them. Their favorability ratings are the lowest that any party has been in like centuries. That doesn't mean people aren't going to vote for Democrats. It does mean, however, that generally Democratic voters are not satisfied with the Democratic Party. And of course, Republicans hate Democrats because, like every out-party person, they view the other party as the Antichrist. So how do we measure party identification in the literature? We do it through the Michigan model, 7-point scale. It goes from strong Democrat at 1 to strong Republican at 7. Why is it like this? Because the French ruined our brains and we think of liberal as left and conservative as right. That's why this goes this way, and we don't speak Arabic, so our numbers go from left to right. This also includes leaners and true independents. They don't exist. And this can kind of help us in the literature predict voting attitudes, trust, and the like. Usually what we'll do is we have survey research in political science. This will be included in there so we can see what people's party identification is, unless we just go through like publicly available voter roll data for more observational studies. The reason why I say leaners and true independents don't exist is because, fun fact, a person who has this position and a person who has this position is going to be a much stronger supporter of the party that they lean towards than any of these people. That's what the literature bears out. Because people like to pretend that they are independent and impartial and centrist, but everybody lies to themselves. Nobody is independent. Everybody has their own beliefs. They're just uneducated about where those beliefs map onto. Sources of participation. I love that I found these images. We have one that says, "I only cry when Democrats hold me," and one that says, "Grab them by the ballot," and I would hate to be a child for either of these families because it's a kid. Like, guys, come on. It's your child. So, party identification comes from family transmission and community socialization. I argue those are kind of the primary ones, but that's not entirely true. Children will often adopt their parents' party identification, and then that gets reinforced by local and political culture. You guys don't have to out yourselves. You can choose not to raise your hand. But how many of you have the same party identification as your parents? How many of you do not have the same party identification as your parents? Great. How many of you chose not to raise your hand? Swell. I respect the hell out of you. Ideological congruence, basically the alignment of one's policy preferences with a party platform, also contribute to identification. That sounds like a really right there statement that if you have thoughts that align with the thoughts of another party, maybe you should vote for them. But remember, America is not an ideological country. We don't have a lot of isms that people believe in. We don't have communists here. We don't have socialists. We don't have fascists. We don't have people who ascribe to those beliefs verbally. We like to think that we're above that. We do have those people because those people have the same beliefs that are descriptively the same things as those definitions, but we don't like to say that in the same way that Europeans will have a socialist party or will have a Christian Democrat party or have these ideologically driven parties. So our ideology will influence what parties we glom onto, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's because the parties are ideological in and of themselves. Obviously, evaluations of party performance influence what we identify as. By that, I mean right now with the Democratic Party. Democratic voters don't think that Democrats are doing a good job. That's why even though they might vote for Democrats, you will see these interviews and these focus groups where people will say, yeah, I voted for Kamala Harris, but I am not a Democrat. I'm not a centrist either. I just don't think that the Democratic Party is speaking to me. You saw the same issue in the Republican Party before Donald Trump steps in. There was a huge gap between kind of the corporatist view of the Republican Party under Mitch McConnell in the Obama days and the more poorer blue-collar Americans who had come to identify under a lot of their small government policies. And finally, group membership and social identity. We all want to be a part of something. We just want to feel like we belong somewhere. And, sometimes where we belong is screaming in a political rally with the red-faced middle-aged man next to us who's probably going to have a hernia because he's so excited. Sometimes that's what makes us want to vote for someone. You would be shocked at how flexible people's political beliefs are based on the group that they're in and how badly they want them to think they're cool. Now, parties aren't monoliths. There are variations within them. And before I go any further, I have to explain this terrifying picture of a dog. I have talked about blue dog Democrats before. They were conservative, often segregationist Democrats who met in a room with a painting of a blue dog in Congress during the 1950s and the 1960s, before we had the party realignment where more left people got put into the Democrats and more right-leaning people got put into the Republicans. I had never looked up what that picture was until I looked up stuff for this lecture. Who thought that was a good idea to put in the halls of government? That's terrifying. So yeah, there's variations within. Race, religion, gender, and education matter. Each party wants to be the party of the working class because nobody wants to be the party of the rich, including the rich. You see on these survey responses, even rich people continuously say, you know what, no, I'm middle class, because there's nothing attractive about saying that you are rich. It just makes you sound like an asshole. Additionally, generational shifts shape partisan balance. You will have generational change, and I cover this on Thursday between parties. You will hear, West Virginia is a great example of this. For years and years and years, people after the New Deal voting Democrat, even if they might be socially conservative, because the Democrats under FDR supported their unions, which was super important for working conditions for all West Virginia coal miners. Then Donald Trump comes along, and they flip to be Republican because there was that generational gap. The old folks were still voting for Democrats, even though they might have preferred a Mitt Romney socially, or even though they might have preferred a John McCain socially. They still voted for Barack Obama, because Barack Obama was a member of FDR's party. And regional context, of course, reinforces realignments. A Democrat who is running in rural Maine, Maine is a very weird state politically, is going to be very different than a Democrat running in New York City. They're going to have different priorities. They're going to have different beliefs about things. One might be more conservative than the other. One might be further left than the other. Same thing with Republicans. A Republican in a swing state like North Carolina is by and large probably going to be a lot less conservative than a Republican in the state of Mississippi, simply because the voters are more mixed there and they have to vie for those votes, those ostensibly independent swing voters. Let's talk about the biggest waste of time in American society: third parties and independents. Third parties don't exist in America because of first-past-the-post voting. They do, but they're lying to themselves. There are structural barriers that hinder third-party access. I shouldn't be too mean to them. I like the idea of third parties, but our voting structure doesn't allow them to gain ground. These are some examples of them. First, we have the two-party dominance. Not only does our system of voting through first-past-the-post voting not allow for third parties to come in because they just spoil elections then, the two parties in charge are the ones who are in those elected positions that change election laws. If it benefits their party, why on earth would they want to change that? They could just stay in charge forever then. That's why, even when you see an independent like Bernie Sanders or Angus King in Maine get into Congress, they technically don't have a party affiliation. They still need to caucus with a party because they couldn't do anything if they weren't attached to a party. The literature suggests that third parties do have influence. If you see the threat of a third party candidate running in an election, and they might actually win some votes, it could shift the views of one of the major parties because they don't want that person to act as a spoiler. For instance, if you see a Republican candidate running and you see a third-party candidate come up as a spoiler along libertarian lines, you might see the Republican candidate start to emphasize more smaller government policies, less social intervention. They will downplay perhaps their pro-life position, because libertarians, true libertarians, don't like pro-life positions, even if morally they disagree with abortion, because they view it as the government stepping in. You might also see a Republican stop talking about the death penalty so much, because libertarians see the death penalty as permission for the state to kill its citizens. Libertarians don't like that. They will also see them downplay foreign intervention in wars. And the same thing happens on the left too. If the Green Party starts getting too much attraction from the Democratic base, you might see a Democratic candidate start to talk about climate change more. They'll downplay perhaps their more technocratic influences. This was more of an Obama era thing. And independence rarely disrupts system stability. Next time you interact with someone who says that they are an enlightened centrist, that they like to weigh both sides, that they like to hear this and that, at the end of the day, they are making a choice. They are voting for one of the two parties. They are a partisan in everything but label. And sure, I might be being very mean to them, and even some of you in this room right now, but the literature is also mean to you guys. So I have books to back up my meanness. Basically, Independents, at the end of the day, have to make a selection between two candidates in the American system, and therefore they don't actually swing elections away from the status quo, that being the two-party system that we have. They're not going to cause fundamental change in American society. They're just voters like you and me. So what are the big takeaways here? This took a while. Parties solve coordination problems and structure democracy. Parties exist. They have to exist because we've dug this hole for ourselves, so we might as well sit in it. US parties balance decentralization with persistence. What the hell do I mean by that? Yes. Because US parties are decentralized, they are not this idea of responsible parties, the central platform with these specific tenets that we need to follow. They need to balance that with more persistent identities, right? The Democratic Party for years was the party of the worker, the party of FDR. That's the identity that they had. For years, the Republican Party was the party of Ronald Reagan, and that meant something. It's morning in America. Partisan identity is both psychological and social. There are individual processes that happen in our brains that allow us to adapt to become a partisan, but also how we feel about the people we interact with and how they feel about us influences our partisan identification. And finally, stable partisanship underpins electoral behavior. America relies on parties. Dunkin' Donuts is lying to you. America doesn't run on Dunkin'. It runs on a two-party system. If it didn't have this two-party system, we wouldn't be America.